Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited you're here with us today. We are going to be unpacking an epic fantasy saga that has literally captivated millions of people, generated passionate academic study, and sparked some of the absolute fiercest debates in modern literature. I'm talking, of course, about Patrick Rothfuss's wildly successful, brilliantly complex, and deeply polarizing series, The Kingkiller Chronicle. Let that number on the screen sink in for a second. 20 million. The first two books in the series have sold an estimated 20 million copies. That essentially makes this the most successful debut epic fantasy of the entire century. Honestly, even if you haven't read a single page, you're looking at an absolute cultural juggernaut. It completely redefined what readers expect from fantasy world building and prose. So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the phenomenon itself. Then we'll dive into the science of magic, the power of names, and the big debate over our protagonist, Kvothe. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at some unconventional side quests and the endless wait for the finale. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the phenomenon and megatexts. So, what actually makes the world of Temerant so insanely gripping for casual readers and serious academics alike? Well, it all comes down to this concept of a megatext. Basically, a megatext is a blueprint for a fully invented universe, but one that is meticulously described with almost academic detail. Rothfuss doesn't just hand-wave things away by saying, a wizard did it. Instead, he builds this incredibly solid foundation of values, history, and physical laws that feel just as rigid and real as our own reality. As a reader, you are immersed in a world that genuinely operates on logic. In fact, Rothfuss's magic is so heavily structured and rule-bound that it's actually being analyzed in master's theses. Academics literally compare his magic systems to actual, real-world physics, thermodynamics, and even African voodoo traditions. And this matters because it completely grounds the fantastical elements. It makes you, the reader, feel like you're studying actual science, rather than just reading a fairy tale. Moving right along to Section 2, the science of magic. In the Kingkiller Chronicle, magic isn't just a mystical waving of a wand, it's a rigorous science that's actively taught at a university. The flagship system they teach there is called Sympathy, and it is governed by some very strict laws. First, you have the doctrine of correspondence, which basically means similarity enhances the magical connection. Then you have the principle of consanguinity, where a piece of a thing can represent the whole, and crucially, it obeys the law of conservation, meaning energy cannot be created or destroyed. Think about it. If you want to use magic to lift a coin, you have to physically exert the exact amount of energy required to lift it. It directly mirrors real-world thermodynamics. But to actually perform sympathy, a practitioner needs what's called Auri. This is a mental technique sometimes referred to as the writing crop belief, and it is essentially the heavy lifting of this whole magic system. An arcanist has to intentionally split their mind to completely believe conflicting things all at once. To make the magic happen, you have to force your will upon reality. You have to intensely believe, for example, that a rock will float upward when you drop it, completely overriding your own logical knowledge of gravity. Okay, so how does this build into actual technology in the world? By contrasting sympathy with Sygaldry. While sympathy creates spontaneous, short-lived effects driven by a person's active willpower and alar, Sygaldry makes those effects permanent. It does this through a highly complex alphabet of 197 specific runes etched into physical objects. By combining these runes, characters can engineer permanent magical devices. We're talking things like lamps that turn ambient heat into light, or a set of simultaneous bells that ring together from miles and miles apart. It's magic as engineering, which is just so cool. Which brings us to Section 3, the power of names. Now, while hard magic like sympathy is strict, academic, and very physically grounding, naming is intuitive, shifting, and deeply unpredictable. It's a system where power is drawn not from physics, but from an almost spiritual understanding of a thing's true, fundamental essence. It's not something you can just map out on a chalkboard with equations, and it represents a total departure from the rigid scientific rules that govern the rest of this world. To really understand naming, listen to this description from Elodin, the university's master namer. He says, "A word is nothing but a painting of a fire. A name is the fire itself." It's so poetic, right? When the protagonist, Kvothe, occasionally manages to grasp the true name of the wind, he taps into a raw, untamed power that totally usurps all those scientific rules we just talked about. It's unpredictable, chaotic, and honestly breathtaking. All right, section 4. Let's talk about the guy at the center of all this. Kvothe. Hero or jerk? Look, while many readers absolutely love Kvothe, there is a highly vocal segment of the audience who literally cannot stand him. As a critical review from Words and Dirt highlights, some readers see Kvothe not as a compelling underdog hero who miraculously survived extreme poverty, but as a completely arrogant prodigy. The critique argues that his ability to constantly weasel his way out of tight spots turns the story into an insufferable male power fantasy driven by a deeply smug attitude. And this debate absolutely extends to his love interest Denna, whom critics often argue feels like a two-dimensional conduit for Kvothe's own greatness. But here's the really fascinating narrative puzzle we have to consider. Is this a flaw in the writing, or is it entirely intentional? We have to remember the frame narrative of this entire series. Kvothe is an older, broken innkeeper narrating the history of his own youth over 3 days to a chronicler. So are we supposed to see the sophomoric failings of youth here? Is his unbearable arrogance a carefully constructed high cliff from which he is eventually going to take a massive, tragic fall? It's such a brilliant debate to have. That brings us to Section 5, Unconventional Side Quests. Beyond Kvothe, Rothfuss expands his universe in some incredibly unique ways. Take the companion novella, The Slow Regard of Silent Things. This book breaks almost every traditional narrative rule you can think of. It follows Auri, a secondary character, living down in the hidden tunnels beneath the university. But here's the catch. There's no real beginning, middle, or end. There's no traditional climax. It's essentially plotless. Instead, it relies purely on beautiful, poetic prose to explore her day-to-day life and her totally unique, fractured view of the world. It just proves that the world of Temerant can be utterly captivating even without high-stakes action sequences. And finally, Section 6, The Endless Wait and Hollywood Gridlock. The sheer ambition of this series has led to a completely stalled franchise out here in the real world. Back in 2015, a massive Lionsgate deal was struck. By 2016, Lin-Manuel Miranda, fresh off the nuclear success of Hamilton, was attached to write songs and produce. Showtime even picked up a TV prequel in 2017. Guys, it looked like the next Game of Thrones. But then, Showtime abruptly halted everything in 2019. And in 2022, Lin-Manuel Miranda officially exited the project. So why did it collapse? Well, Miranda noted his own massive workload, for sure, but he also pointed to the very thing that makes the books a masterpiece: their insane Russian nesting doll structure. It's a story within a story told by an unreliable narrator across multiple timelines. What is absolutely brilliant on the page turned out to be an absolute nightmare to adapt for the screen. And then there is the agonizing wait for the books themselves. Book 1 dropped way back in 2007. Book 2 came out in 2011. And Book 3, The Doors of Stone? Well, in 2020, Rothfuss's own editor frankly admitted she hadn't seen a single word of a draft since 2016. It is a grueling wait for the millions of fans who really just want to know how the third and final day of Kvothe's story ends. Which leaves us with one massive, lingering question. After well over a decade, will The Doors of Stone ever see the light of day to resolve these seemingly impossible expectations? Or is the complex, beautifully flawed magic of this universe destined to remain an unfinished puzzle forever? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one. Keep exploring.